Today, in this space, we have a common vision about life, which has to do with the role that entrepreneurs play in society. And as the title of this 35th Assembly asserts, the change of the economic paradigm that Argentina is going through, we hope will spread to the rest of the region and also to the world. We are talking about the change of paradigm because, in short, Argentina decided 10 months ago to leave behind the recipes that impoverished it for more than 100 years, to begin to apply the ideas of freedom, growth and progress, which are the same ideas that lifted 90% of the world's population out of poverty in the last 300 years. There was an old saying that says that credibility and confidence go up the ladder but go down the elevator. And Argentina's credibility, after being the greatest serial defaulter in modern history and incurring a practically uninterrupted century of tax deficit and systematic violations of property rights, was completely destroyed in the last 40 years. Imagine how bad things were in the country that adopted the evil called social justice, which isn't just and not social, because it is deeply antisocial, because it is part of a robbery and an unequal treatment under the law. The citizens elected the first liberal, libertarian president, without a political party, nor governors, nor mayors. Obviously, under normal conditions of pressure and temperature, there are no liberal, libertarian presidents. So basically, I had to do a lot of bad things to get out of here. In fact, in my other life, when I gave talks at economic conferences, I would say that I was a type 2 error because I did everything wrong and it turned out well. And you imagine being, in general, economists are not very popular people, let's say. Also, if you look inside the economists themselves, there is a group of nerds like me who do mathematical economics. I also dedicate myself to economic growth. As a specialist in a country that is sick with Keynesianism, I mean think only in 5 minutes. Something else just happened to me that I can't replicate. And I think in terms of 100 years, 200, 1000, well, 2000, I left. No, it's a joke. It's part of the situation. And also, being liberal in a country that was basically contaminated by more than 100 years of socialism. So I really did everything for people to hate me. But it went wrong and I ended up being president, getting the most votes in history. But in the end, what one has to understand is that people told him enough of the politicians and their games, and he told them seriously, because such a slap to politics and to the analogical red circle means that people are really very tired, and they are really tired. In the 10 months we've been in government, we've seen this paradigm shift in management, with advanced kilometers correcting the macroeconomy. We've recovered monetary stability, which is the basis to have a healthy, growing economy. We're reducing the structural cost in the Argentine economy and the cost of taxes and regulations, which exponentially increase the prices of all goods and services in our economy. And as a result of this change of direction, we are setting up in a way that sustains the trust in our country. The country risk was around 3,000 basis points at the time of the elections, and yesterday was down to 1,200 basis points. And this is important because we have it frozen. In terms of GDP, because if the country's risk was around the 3,000 basis points, which is to return to the fiscal policy, other degenerate fiscal policies of politics, that would imply a GDP of $400 billion. And with this system of fiscal policy that we have today, at today's prices with the country's risk, not from this week, but from a week ago. The GDP is $600 billion. In other words, to return to the steps of the bad fiscal policy would cost us $200 billion. In other words, it's not only a lower GDP, but it's a low per capita GDP. In fact, the budget discussion, if one had done it seriously, approving expenses without contemplating the resources, which violates the state financial administration law, and in the Senate they also violated the Senate statute. Look at what is interesting, what the increase would imply for universities, which in the end would be to give in to all politics. The old way of doing politics, take no the budget restriction, would imply returning to the steps and returning to the risk levels that we had with the Kirchnerism, with which we would go from a GDP of $600 billion to one of $400 billion. In other words, we would be losing a third of the GDP. So when you take the resources for universities, if you take the case of 600 billion without the increase, or you take the increase and 400 billion, the numbers are more or less tied together. But in the middle, you reduce the GDP per capita. We lose a third of the GDP. When you look at the impact of the GDP in dollars and the GDP in pesos, the impact of the GDP in pesos is 1/3, or real GDP, than what it is in dollars. This means that in the middle, there is a jump in the type of real change that not only makes the GDP fall, but exacerbates the increase in poor people by the increasing in the type of real change. So what are we talking about? And that's as if the claim was genuine. If in the middle we consider that it is a mere euphemism to defend the work of 3 or 4 criminals, thieves and noble cause and prostitutes, to earn money at the cost of stealing from students and teachers, and what has to do with buildings and others. I think there's not much more to discuss, and we have come to do the things that are right, regardless of what the public opinion says, by the terror that many have to tell the truth. We came to finish the job, and in the background, if they were clean. What is the problem with being audited if they were clean? It has been almost 10 years since they have been audited. The only thing we are asking is to audit them. But it seems that this is putting public education at risk. Actually, quite the opposite. It is to save public education. That is, if they were clean at the beginning of the audit. Clearly, they would share the numbers, but they do not want to do it. There must be some reason. But what I want to be clear is that returning to the past is not free. It is at least losing a third of the GDP. Or, if I wanted to put it in terms of achievement, this low country risk allows us to go from a GDP of $400 billion to one of $600 billion because of the effect it has on the value of assets. The low country risk and what it allows in terms of macroeconomic coordination, which is 50% more. Look at that number. There is no management. But as I was saying, the consequences of all this began to be seen, for example, with the credit premium never seen before. In November, there were no quotas for minority businesses, and today there is mortgage credit at 30 years, as if we were Singapore, accompanied by personal credit in companies. That is, if you remember, in November and December we were discussing hyperinflation. We were saying how we managed to live day by day. Today it is becoming one of the tools of higher social mobility, which is to buy property, and it can be done at 30 years. Therefore, look if we have changed the macroeconomic context. I will not be reviewing all the numbers I usually give regularly, but I do want to mention one, the inflation. Because when one takes the highest inflation index, in the month of December, which was 54%, that implied an annualization of 17,000%, and all monetary conditions were in place for that. If there was validation, and there is an indicator that anticipates the lowest inflation today, last recorded the highest was 2.1%. That is 28% annually. The GFRI have not done the titanic task to fix the monetary problem, and therefore this is what explains that they may be another temporary horizon for investments in Argentina. In terms of investments, the ROBBERY continues to plant ads throughout the country with very positive predictions for the commercial and energy sectors. In the first phase we enacted, has outdone all expectations, even overcoming the first phase of the whiteout of the Macri administration, which had already been a success. That is, when you look at the deposits in dollars, the number is truly shocking what is happening. But sometimes it seems that there's a lack of historical perspective, or there is ignorance or bad intentions, all at the same time. As a result of this, deposits in dollars in the private sector are today at record levels. Day by day, it becomes easy to set up a company in Argentina, and we all know what happens with salaries when there are more companies competing among themselves to attract the same number of workers. In this sense, we continue to work every day, unleashing the Gordian knot that the profits of the impoverishment model builds. All this in order to continue to climb steps in terms of economic freedom that will bring us more savings, more investment, more growth, and more prosperity. I usually say recurrently that we work to be the freest country in the world. In fact, the reform of the basic law passed today in 7023 allows us to have a leap in terms of economic freedom of almost 90 positions. We would go from being at level similar to countries like Germany, like Italy, like France, but that is not enough for us. We have 3,200 pending reforms, and you can see the enormous task carried out by our colossal Minister of Regulation, Federico Sturzenegger. And when you see that day by day, you will realize that without a doubt, when we finish this mandate, without doubt we will be the freest country in the world, with what this implies in dynamic terms. So basically, I don't want to stop and make a detailed account of our brief management that you have already heard on other occasions, but I do want to make an emphasis on telling you where this ship is going, which is the freest country in the world. Many times when I use this expression, they make me go crazy. I also said this in a report. What is the difference between a genius and a madman? Success. Or when I say that I would like to reach levels of quality of life similar to those of Australia, everyone screams at the sky as if it was impossible. I'm going to tell you something about Australia, a country that I also admire and for which I have a lot of appreciation. But Australia was a nation founded by criminals. That is, they went from being the discard of England to becoming a first world country. Argentina knew how to be a country with the highest GDP per capita in the world in 1895, in the Angus Madison series. If Australians could, why can't we? If we did it 100 years ago, why can't we do it again? Let's think that when Argentina was born as Argentina in 1860, strictly, with the unification of Buenos Aires, Argentina was a barbaric country. And in 35 years, it became the first world power. If we could do it in the 19th century, why can't we do it now? We have better technological conditions at global level. We have to be encouraged. We have to get out of mediocrity. There is an Argentine power with levels of life similar to Australia, New Zealand, Italy, Spain, United States. The ones they like, Ireland. Not only is it not a madness, but it is manifest destiny if we keep this path. Do not have doubts. That is our destiny if we manage to respect some basic precepts of the economy, such as tax balance, monetary stability, and also if we manage to beat that crack in many heads. That is the Argentine cost. A country where inflation will be just a bad memory. And believe me, it will be achieved. Where the Argentines will have regained the ability to make economic calculations. And each one will be able to plan, save, invest, and be the owner of their own destiny. A country where it is the one that produces and not the state that chooses what supplies to use, who to hire, who to sell, and at what price. A country where cutting-edge technology can be imported to improve competitiveness, without paying 2 or 3 times its value because of confiscatory taxes. A country where each one can enjoy the fruit of their work without fear of being stolen, or even being killed for something as basic as a cell phone. A country where you can buy TVs at the counter and a house in cash, and not the other way around as it happened until very recent here. A country where you do not have to cross the border to get a pair of high-quality shoes or a good price. A country with minimal taxes, paid with quality services, not with municipalities, provinces, and a voracious national state, charging the same tax 3 times to provide services per capita 3 times. A country where it is not talked about extraordinary earnings to charge you more taxes when you had a good year. Because if the moral purpose of every business is to earn money, how can a profit be extraordinary? Here I want to make a point because it seems interesting to me. There is nothing more aberrant than talking about this concept of taxing extraordinary earnings and so on. I suppose you have an economy of 2 sectors. I am going to make it easy. And for some reason, either because people's preferences changed, or because there was a problem that caused a negative shock on the supply of one of the goods, you have a change of relative prices. Suppose an earthquake comes and part of the economy is lost. Obviously, the goods that were linked to that sector are going to contract the supply, and that is going to make the price higher. That is, that relative price in that sector is going to be higher. The same when the problem of the beads appeared. Now, that relative higher price, that extraordinary profit, is actually a signal that is saying where to reassign the capital, where to move the capital, how to reassign the capital. Therefore, if you punish the extraordinary result, what you are doing is making it difficult and putting sticks on the wheel to solve the problem. That is, you need that price signal to flow so that the resources are reassigned, and in that way solve the problem. This is the same discussion as the type of real change. I say that they are a nuisance already. Well, luckily, let's say the economicities have already come down a lot. But suppose, let's say, I can do the same. If I have tax balance, I have a constant amount of money. I do not have elements of the economic policy that are generating artificial problems. Now, if I have a problem in a sector, for example, let's say I have an economy of transable and non-transable, and for some reason, I do not know, an earthquake comes and breaks half of the non-transable sector. That would make the price of the non-transable. It has to go up. So in the logic of the economist 80s, they would be telling me that the type of real change is appreciated because the price of non-transable would be rising a lot. So how would they want to fix it, the economist 80s? Evaluate, 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 evaluate. The type of change is trace, evaluate, evaluate. This is interesting because if I evaluate, that is, I listen to them and evaluate. What is the problem? The problem is that I needed to send the resources to the non-transable sector, and evaluating, I break the price signal, and therefore I never finish solving the problem. That is, Argentina has had that problem since we have that cursed institution called Central Bank of the Argentine Republic. That they use a central bank to correct problems in the real sector. Now, the problems in the real sector are fixed in the real sector. The only thing the central bank can do is to keep the inflation in line, something for which we work actively. So if I violate that signal, what happens to me happens to me. I stop the amount of money, I end up with the tax deficits. And obviously the recomposition of relative prices will make the non-transables more expensive. Why? Because for more than 70, 80, almost 100 years I dedicated myself to what? To breaking the price signal. It is not free. This is also important because then when the extraordinary benefit appears to that businessman who is harvesting the extraordinary benefit, instead of pursuing him, he should be giving him a prize. He would have to be taking him to Andes. In other words, think about the middle of the pandemic, the need for masks. Yes, of course, he's going to make a lot of money if there is a furious reaccommodation of the demand. But that guy is the one who is fixing their problems. He is the one who generates me to have a greater number of masks. On the other hand, what happens? If the state gets in and starts to interfere with prices, what happens? There will be less. And on top of that, because the resources want to move from sector A to sector B, but since I am capping the price, sector A is going to destroy me, but sector B is not going to expand. So that idea is full of envy and resentment. We have to fight it from the start, because the one who earns money is a hero. He is a social benefactor because he does it by selling prices of better qualities, a better price. So this is not less, because if Argentina is going to start generating a process of strong economic growth, as he starts generating that process, you are going to generate extraordinary earnings. And let's not give way to the stupid assholes who come to say that this is wrong. Because those who are based on envy, hatred, resentment, are going to come and kick the bucket. The Gini coefficient, the inequality. And in reality, those guys who are capturing the great benefits are the ones who are going to make Argentina a great country again. So, let's give that battle. That's why I'm deviating from the original speech. I'm sorry. But I would love to read you process. But there is an effect that is called years, and I don't see it. I would love to be able to read you. Matt C. What does it say? Yes, I have a lot of demands. There are a lot of people proposing that I go to other countries to do the same. I'm going to have a problem of nationality. So this, I ask you openly. Because that is the debate that is going to come in the face of the future. That is, from now on, all the news that the Argentine economy is going to give, I'll get. In fact, if you take the worst number that came out, the last one that came out, which was, if he decomposed between the first quarter and the second quarter, poverty, it's true that it reached 56%, but then in the second quarter it fell to 51%, and have no doubt that for the first quarter it would be in 49%. That is, if I take the data on activity, the last indicator of the ME gave 1.7. If I take the station, the last data against December, the fall of the GDP is 0.6. Nothing if we take into account that we have just made the biggest fiscal adjustment in the history of humanity. In fact, it is a very important exercise. In fact, it is a heroic exercise. It does not mean that I'm talking about the number that I'm going to give, so that you have an idea of the speed. An economy where it grows strong, let's suppose 5%, the station grows 0.4 per month. The last data gave 1.7. It means that the speed that the last data show is from an economy that moves at a rate of 23%. That is because the other day I got the reference from a Satan idiot journalist. And they say it in these terms so that they cannot know if I'm talking about a man or a woman. I say, but I did it in a primetime program in the 47th minute. As you will see, we have it well calibrated. We have those criminals who are calibrated, but do not think that they will have to go looking in places at the hostile grid. Not. That said, the number that was published yesterday of 1.5 is very good. And yet, what do you do? You have an economy that was being destroyed, that hyperinflation was on the way, that we were on the way to have poverty explode, that we were on the way to destroy the level of activity. Because I warn you, an adjustment that was half of what we did was what tools are dead. I tell you that the GDP fell 11%, and in the second quarter, which was when it was full, it fell 16%. Look at the numbers we are talking about. So it is clear that when you have the drop, if you compare against the same month of the previous year, it will give negative. Well, the person in question did everything with that, and not in the monthly station indicator. That is showing the output. They're free to see the bad intention that they have. Because apart, let's say, one thing is that one makes a mistake once, twice. Now it is always wrong and always to the same side. An economist would say that this is called autocorrelation. Let's say. But well, nothing, let's get out of there better. But in short, what I want to promote is a country anchored in three fundamental principles, which are the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property for all Argentinians. All this implies a new role for entrepreneurship. In the coming Argentina, I am going to say it very clearly. I must not, nor can I. I mean, I must not in moral terms. And I cannot, because given the facial conceit, be the one who commands the decisions that you must take. You must be the ones who take them, knowing that on this side there is a government that supports them and that is willing to do everything to do things right. If you do not see what I am fighting to defend is deficit zero, or what I am fighting to maintain zero emission, and all that we are doing, deregulating every day, so that precisely every day it is easier to invest in Argentina. We will persist in our mission, even if the consequence is ostracism, because, as Cicerone said, the lack of prestige acquired for doing the right thing is not absolute lack of prestige, but rather glory. So I tell you, take risks, invest, innovate, and bet on the industry and trade, because in the new Argentina, the words effort and merit have a real meaning and will be rewarded. We came to reconvert Argentina into the great power that should never have ceased to be, and we know that the key to achieving it is the trade that turns enemies into clients and competitors into collaborators. That is why I do not come here to appeal to your humanity, but to your own benefit, whose prosecution is a benefit for society. Adam Smith transformed a little. It is an adaptation, a 2024 version. Now I'm going to take care of the bling again. Today you got me in good humor. There is a phrase repeated until the last breath by the well-thinking left that says, no one is saved alone. And what the left does not understand is that the market is precisely the demonstration of this. I say the first thing, and this surprises me, that you ask an economist, and an economist does not know what the market is. This is very serious, because I ask what the market is, and they answer me trying to put into words a curve of supply and demand. That speaks very badly of the professional. The market is a process of social cooperation, where individuals voluntarily exchange property rights. That is the market. In fact, if you understood it like that, there is a whole part of the literature that would already be eradicated. Why? Because there cannot be market failures. Because for there to be a market failure, there has to be coercion. But if there is coercion, then trades are not voluntary, which violates the definition of a market. Notice that while Butter Vinegar's Lynch's definition of liberalism is the respect and restriction of the next life project, based on the principle of non-aggression and in defense of the right to life, liberty and property. Therefore, there can be no coercion, because if you are coercing, you are seizing freedom, where you are impacting on the rights of property. In their sense, the first thing that these people fail is that they do not know what the market is. And the truth is that many economists do not know either. But then there is a wonderful report by Alejandro Fantina to my ex-competitor from the Valutage. He says to him, and what are you going to tell the markets that is going to make such a person in a vulnerable sector? And Fantino says, to finish with the verse of the market says he says, but excuse me, we have been doing the opposite for 40 years, with which we charge taxes. We charge everything and the result is not there. So I say, at least, I'm not going to have anything, but at least I have more money in my pocket. I say, as long as I can coordinate with other people and do it. So in a free market, to be able to save ourselves, we must be useful for a third, providing goods as services of better quality at a better price. This triggers a virtuous circle in which everyone benefits mutually. Give back the idea of the invisible hand. I mean, today I'm with Dad. I'm intense. I mean, I took out the Scots flag and emptied it. It must be because I started listening to Rostigua, other things. In time, it is the multiplication of wealth that allows us to carry out the greatest works of charity and philanthropy known to man. It's not receiving benefits, but lending services, that we make the whole grow. That is why it is an honor of the great fathers of this country that we want to point Argentina in the direction of sustained growth, because as Pericles said, those with work should their valley, with work they should receive their tribute. We did not come to fill our mouths inaugurating plazolets, cultural centers or rights in pro-condition with the names of Alberti, Roca or Sarmiento. We came to raise the testimony that 100 years of infamy have let fall, and thus put Argentina again as the hero in the history of the world, as it should have always been. Thank you very much to all. May God bless the Argentines. May the forces of heaven accompany us, and long live freedom, damn it.